we have Ian Hendry.
So, after witnessing how brutal that was, I think this I'm a shoot producer director and an edit producer in factual TV. I work for a company called AirTV Studios, which is based in Glasgow. I've worked on I'm currently at the moment a shooting producer director on Antiques Road Trip, and previously I've worked on a number of other productions for Channel 4, BBC. We worked on like a documentary called What Killed the Whale for Channel 4. We worked on the documentary series Inside Central Station for BBC Scotland. Worked on series for Dave, worked on other antique shows and other high volume stuff for Channel 5 and other things for BBC 2. So there's a whole load of like programs that are out there in the factual TV world, and it's you know, the budgets are not as big in like factual TV as they are in some of the feature film kind of industries and high-end drama and stuff, but it's a really good industry if you want to really get your hands on stuff from an early stage, and if you want to always be kind of like in the creative process from a very early stage, you'll kind of get very editorially involved from an early stage, hands on cameras from early stages, and it's very kind of every day is different. You're always kind of chasing action. It's a good industry to be involved in that side. I thought it would be helpful if I just describe a bit about what my job actually involves, and then I can just tell you what we're kind of looking for when I interview runners to come and work on these productions that I'm talking about. So, like edit producer, for example, is essentially you're working alongside an editor. And I mean, one thing I'll say about these shows is they vary a lot in terms of the style of show that it is, based on the pace that you're going at. So, for example, STV Studios made a documentary series called The Firm, which was like 7 or 8 episodes, and they made that over 6 months. But they will make a series of like something like Grey Auction Showdown, and they'll make 40 episodes of that in the same amount of time. So there's very different paces and very different styles of working on different programs that are within the factual space, depending on what you choose to work on. Other just 1 hour one-off documentaries will take a crew a year to make, so it just depends on what you're working on. But they all have different skill sets. They're all fun to work on in different ways. And yeah, so if you're an edit producer working on, you kind of essentially work with an editor, and the edit producer, you kind of decide the structure of the program, you decide what order it goes in, you're kind of like laying down the sink in terms of, right, we want to start with these guys going to talk about this, we'll have a bit of VO, we'll go into this, we'll then go into this scene. You kind of construct the narrative and the flow of the entire thing, and then you work with an editor to bring that together as a program. Like I said, if you're working on something like Inside Central Station, you probably need to put an episode together in about 3 weeks or something like that. If you're working on something like Antiques Road Trip, then that would be more like a week and a half or 7 days if you're lucky or something. So it's quick. But like I mean, I think Sarah mentioned there's sometimes the independent film lets you kind of not stick within somebody's format. That's exactly what we do. We are sticking you inside formats quite a lot. So it's all about trying to hit format beats. It's all about trying to kind of like learn format beats, but also be expressive within those format beats. That's how you kind of achieve some of those high volume things. But even the more like ob-doc kind of series that are just like following, then even those things will still have their formatted way of doing things. So as a shooting producer director, I mean, you are like obviously self-shooting. You're like, I guess there's a kind of 3 elements to it. Obviously with factual, you're in these environments where if you are doing more like an ob-doc series, it's all about chasing the action in terms of you've got to try and like very quickly hone in on what you think the story is. You're very often kind of shooting off the shoulder. We'd standardly shoot with like things like an FX9, maybe with an easy rig. A lot of the time you're doing your own sound with lapel radio mics and things, or you might have a sound aid depending on the kind of production that it is. You'll have a crew supporting you. Usually a shooting PD has a crew of about, depending on the production, it could be like 7, it could be 3, but usually it's like runners, researchers, and APs. Usually now they like to kind of stick shooting in front of some of those roles, so you'll be like a shooting AP and things like that. So I think that's where especially in this kind of environment where you're in now, learning how to shoot, learning how to, learning composition on the fly, learning how to kind of what makes a good image, how to kind of quickly learn your kit and everything, that is invaluable when you're trying to get into these kind of industries, or if you're trying to work for companies like AirTV Studios and these kind of shows. Because I remember I was president of AirTV 10 plus years ago now, and I remember all the skills that I learned when I was where you guys are, in terms of just learning how to quickly film, how to quickly recognize good shots, all these kind of things. To get that baked in, if you have those skills baked in when you try and get into these industries, that's invaluable for us, because when we're looking for runners, when we're looking for people who are coming in as researchers, we want people who will support those roles as much as possible. So for example, we'll very be often constantly changing lenses. We'll be constantly changing onto a variety of prime lenses while we're shooting factual. So we need runners who know those lenses. They need to know the difference between a wide lens and a zoom, a 16 to 35 or a 35 prime or a 50 prime, or all these kind of things. If you have that kind of knowledge, that's invaluable to us. If you know how to make up someone where there's no rustle and you can hear it clean and everything like that, that's invaluable to us. If you know how to work with contributors, if you know how to kind of get the most out of them, get them on side, win people over, win access, that kind of thing, that is invaluable to us. If you can think editorially in terms of how a story might come together in the edit, and you think we've got a really good sequence there, but how could we complement it? Well, we need a kind of something else that would lead into it here, maybe something that would lead out of it here. If you can think editorially in ways like that for the edit, so that the editors aren't swearing at the crews later somewhere down the line, then again, that is invaluable to us. And that's usually what we're looking for when we interview runners and things. The other kind of skills in terms of how to use the kit and things, obviously, we can teach you that kind of thing, but I think if you have an inherent understanding of good filming, if you have an inherent understanding of what makes a good contributor, an inherent understanding of how to get the best out of a contributor, if you know how to win access and things, then all of those are the kind of things that we are looking for when we interview people to come on these productions. And I thought it might be useful just to kind of talk about how these trees work. So normally, on location, you normally have a kind of, if you want a more editorial route, normally it would go runners, researchers, APs, and then producer directors, and then maybe kind of location producers. For some, that's also still a role that's kind of around. There's lots of location shows and stuff like that will have a location producer alongside a producer director. You'll also kind of have shows with series directors, so that's where you have a number of shooting APs who are working across a project, but you'll have a series director looking after all of them, and then above that you've got the series producer, and normally kind of roundabout there between the PD and the SP and stuff, that's where you've got edit producers doing those kind of roles as well. If you're a bit more organizational, then you kind of go up the production side of it, where you kind of go production coordinator, then you kind of work your way up to kind of senior production coordinator, then production manager. The production managers usually sit with the series producer as the kind of king and queen, or king and king, or whatever you want of the entire thing, queen or queen of the entire thing. And then you've got the other element that is to do with casting, where you've got essentially, that's more of an office-based role, but I've seen people kind of rise up to series producer by not being on location at all, because they're working as casting researchers in the office, because that's normally what they need to do, is they need to find the contributors. That kind of works for entertainment in terms of game shows and things like that, as much as it works for property shows, antique shows, and for factual documentary shows. They all need powerful contributors and powerful stories to make it work. So casting guys will be constantly trying to think about what are the good stories, what are the good characters, and bringing them in. And then you've got casting researchers that then will kind of go up to casting APs, casting producers, and then I've seen people go from there to series producers and things. So those are the kind of routes on the way up. But that's essentially what the kind of factual space looks like. Like Danny was saying, I think it's like a lot of industries. It's an industry that's kind of it's not great at the moment, but it was for example, only a couple of years ago, it was impossible to try and book people, because people just were booked all the time. If you wanted to try and book a crew, you better hope to have booked it in advance, because people were just busy left, right, and centre. So it's the kind of industry that is sometimes feast and famine, and you've sometimes got to plan for that if you're working in it, but that's more than possible. But I think there's good careers to be had in there, and it's a lot of fun. And if there's any other questions that you've got on it, then you can ask me later on. But it's nice to be back in 2W1. I can't believe you guys are still using that same space. I'm just standing